Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight we're engaging in a small tradition we have here where we look at a couple of films which we think might be in contention for this year's Oscars. Now, fair warning, I'm not sure how often this has actually come to pass. I think when we've done these films before, a lot of the time they have not made much dent on the Oscars at all. So if it turns out there's actually an MFV Curse being enacted here, then we apologise to the filmmakers we're about to damn with our considered praise. But yes, this year's lucky participants are Licorice Pizza, a coming-of-age drama by Paul Thomas Anderson, and The Tragedy of Macbeth, a new adaptation of the classic GCSE English tragedy by Joel Cohen. And before we take on those two, Alistair, what else have you consumed in the last fortnight?
So I've been watching a new Korean sci-fi drama on Netflix, which is The Silent Sea. This dropped over Christmas. I think it was released on Christmas Eve. And I think I did start watching it actually on Christmas Day. I know, the end of Christmas Day when everyone else had gone to bed. It's an interesting kind of mystery. The show follows a group of scientists and soldiers in the near future who are sent to a moon base that was mysteriously abandoned in order to retrieve an artifact that could affect the fate of the world. And a lot of the show is them kind of exploring this base, finding out why it's abandoned, finding out that the official story doesn't quite cover everything, and unpeeling the layers of mystery around this place. It's quite tense. There's a lot of intriguing drama. There's a few unexpected twists. So yeah, it's definitely a show I'd recommend.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've heard of this one, but it may possibly just be from you tweeting about it. So you finished the whole thing now. Good ending? Worth the journey?
Yeah, I got to the end, and yeah, I would say it had a quite strange and unexpected ending. It's good, that the ending caught me off guard. It wasn't what I was expecting. There were definitely a few points in the show when I was like, all right, I think I know where this is going, and it would kind of veer off in a different direction, which is always good when your expectations are confounded like that, and the show keeps you guessing. It does build to a very satisfying ending, so it's worth it in its entirety. Not sure if they'll do a second series. They do leave it open a bit, but I kind of quite like it as a sort of self-contained 8-episode sort of arc.
Well, yeah, that was my next question. Is it an ending or is it a cliffhanger or something? Okay, so it might be the ending. As far as we know, it could be the end.
It could be the end, yeah, but there's definitely scope for a second season. It's not as final an ending as, say, the ending of Dexter New Blood was.
Is that a spoiler? Who knows?
Okay, I just assume that everyone's heard the Dexter New Blood episode at this point, because you've had 2 weeks.
I mean, yeah, I think, well, you've had, the best part of 2 or 3 weeks now is to get the Dexter news. You've got to assume if you care, you may have heard.
Yeah.
I feel like we're just compounding the problem at this point.
This is really part of a sort of, explosion of Korean content on Netflix. I think I checked the Netflix official chart of non-English language TV, and I think there were 4 Korean shows in the top 10, including this one, The Silent Sea.
Are these Korean dramas they're buying in from local channels, or are these things they're making themselves?
I think they're original commissions. I'm pretty sure The Silent Sea was like an original Netflix commission. As it said, like kind of a Netflix show at the beginning.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I guess it's sort of part of the way that Netflix is going international and kind of commissioning, content in almost every country. I guess to kind of meet the needs of the local audience to keep them engaged, but also, I guess, because there are people all over the world who are interested in watching things from different countries, or also just kind of like the fact that if you watch, let's say, a lot of science fiction, it is interesting just to see how different cultures and different countries treat the genre.
Okay, and in your studies of subtitled science fiction, have you noticed any trends?
I don't know. There seems to be... I think that Hollywood science fiction casts a sort of a long shadow, and there's definitely the same vibes you get from, Hollywood films, and sort of similar archetypes and plot structures crop up everywhere. For example, like The Silent Sea involves a lot of bits of kind of crawling through vents, chasing, I guess, something that I should probably not reveal because it's a bit of a twist. And I thought like a lot of this is very reminiscent of Alien, people crawling through vents using motion sensors to track down a fast-moving hostile thing. I mean, Alien's great, and it's a very tense scene, but it's also a kind of, an archetype of the sci-fi genre. There's got to be a bit when they climb into a vent and to try and chase something down, and it's basically the classic, like, no, don't go in there. Like, oh, we found a mysterious vent that something's just fled through. Well, let's follow it in there. You're like, no, that's a really bad idea.
So does it have an alien-esque horror vibe as well as the sci-fi one?
There's definitely a sort of creepiness to it. There are some bits that are quite, sort of shocking and surprising. And it depends on how high your sort of threshold for horror is. I don't know how I really classify it as a horror, but there's definitely some sort of unpleasant bits when they discover, what happened to the people on this, formerly abandoned moon base.
But no one's, well, I was going to say that, but no one's guts come out or anything, but I guess that's probably, and again, a spoiler.
That would be a
You've
spoiler.
got to keep watching throughout the whole thing, waiting to see if anyone's guts come out.
There would definitely be a spoiler. But it is good, and it is tense. Yes, I can certainly recommend it.
Okay, if you're here for Alastair's regular subtitled Netflix content recommendations, then there you go. Another one for the pile.
So that's what I've been up to recently. Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, in the last week or so, I finally got towards the end of watching The Whole of Veep, the HBO political satire show from I think mostly the 2010s, starring Julia Louis-Dreyfus as a fictional vice president, Selina Meyer, who, is very much the President Bartlett of really, really awful, selfish, horrible politicians. This is, of course, also created by Armando Iannucci, who's known primarily for... Well, he's done a lot of things at this point, but I think certainly in Britain he's probably best known for The Thick of It. And, the simplistic way of describing this, I guess, is the American Thick of It. In that, I think shortly after they wrapped on The Thick of It, they basically went to HBO in the US to create a show satirising American politics in a similar way by dramatising the life around a politician and making it clear that a lot of these people are awful. And it's very, very much a lot of these people are awful. It's possibly a bit more realistically bleak. It's perhaps is less focused with driving the situation to comic absurdity and more focused on driving the situation into just grimness, just how morally compromised Selina Meyer is. I mean, especially in the later seasons, which I'm currently getting to, they have done a good job of sort of escalating it to the point of absurdity, the horrible things she is now willing to do, In the first few seasons, there are 7 seasons, I'm now in the midst of the last one. In the first season, she's just, lying to congressmen. By the final season, she's making terrifying deals with foreign warlords. It's all very well escalated.
7 seasons, wow, that's a proper meaty American sitcom.
Yeah, I mean, it's only 8 to 10 episodes a season, so it's not as epic an undertaking as it could be, but it's still quite a lot when strung together.
Yeah, I really liked The Thick of It. I've not watched Veep. I really should at some point, as a big fan of Armando Iannucci. What I guess I liked about The Thick of It was the central premise was it was all about the management of the spin around the politician. The humour was from how basically the lengths they go to keep the public face looking as pristine as possible, and how sort of nasty and backroom wheelie dealy that is. Is that same sort of vibe for Veep, or is it different?
No, there's a lot of that, yeah. A lot of it is, oh no, this shit is trending now, because unlike The Thick of It, obviously, we're at least getting into the Twitter era of politics. The show finished, I think, in the late 2010s, like 2017, 2018, and by then we're definitely well into the swamp of Twitter. So yeah, it's very much up to date with the obsessive need to spray out bullshit statements to manage your image, or try to.
That does sound very, very like an Armando Iannucci show. I guess with The Thick of It, the breakout character was sort of Malcolm Tucker, who was the sort of, larger-than-life figure that transcended the show. So any similar characters in this?
There probably is. I mean, perhaps cleverly they haven't put in a Malcolm Tucker. There's not like a hard-as-nails enforcer, really. I mean, there's a few characters who broadly fit that role in that they come in and from on high to slap the characters down, but they're never given quite as much leeway to steal the scenes as Malcolm Tucker does, perhaps because Armando Iannucci didn't want to redo Malcolm Tucker. If there is a breakout character, it's probably this guy Jonah, who is a sort of really, really horrible, stroppy, entitled, nasty little man who has somehow got a job in the White House from his family connections. Everyone is horrible to him, everyone makes fun of him. Whereas Malcolm Tucker was the king, Jonah is whatever the opposite of the king is, the man who scrubs the toilets. And it's just, there's a sort of ongoing story about his weird ascent through politics, almost against the will of every single person working in politics. I guess I shouldn't actually spoil the plot, but he's doing a lot better than just being an intern by the final season, and no one quite knows how or why, because he's still, to everyone's amusement, well, to my amusement, the viewer, completely and utterly despicable in a way that they just go completely nuts with. So yeah, I think Jonah's probably the sort of breakout character. Jonah's also the one who they have the most sort of fun with. I mean, if there's a criticism of Veep, it's that in sort of long-running sitcom style, by about season 5 or 6, one can feel one has seen the joke. A lot of the characters are just the same as they were in season 2 or 3, orbiting around Selina Meyer, both hating her and unable to escape her, and forced to try and manage her reputation as she acts increasingly terribly. And I'll say this for Jonah Ryan, as well as getting a lot of the entertainingly awful lines, his character does at least steadily advance and change throughout the show.
Again, that sounds like a sort of a classic Armando Iannucci character, someone everyone loves to despise.
Yeah, I think Iannucci left the show after season 5, possibly between seasons 4 and 5 actually, but it hasn't particularly dropped off after season 4. In fact, if anything, the jokes got slightly more horrible after season 4. Like, a lot of the joke is how grim everything that comes out of these people's mouths is, it just isn't a policy discussion if you haven't mentioned the Holocaust at least twice. And if anything, that gets ramped up quite a lot after Iannucci leaves.
Well, it does reflect the bleak political age we live in.
Yeah, I know. And it's, as I say, it's only the last few seasons. I mean, yeah, it may help that the post-Iannucci seasons are also the ones that were happening around the sort of 2016 era grim transformation of politics that we're still suffering through now. So yeah, who knows how bleak the show would have been if it had started in 2016. Maybe they just wouldn't have bothered making it. I'm interested to see how they end it. I'm going to assume in a way that will be miserable for most, if not all, of the characters, but I'm interested to see.
Well, the thick of it ended with Malcolm Tucker going to prison. No spoilers for the end of the thick of it there, but that's also been a while. So yeah, maybe something similar. Maybe they will get impeached.
Yeah, and I guess the difference with Veep is actually focused on the politicians themselves is reliably the star. I mean, Jonah Ryan gets a lot of scenes, but Julia Louis-Dreyfus's Selena Meyer is still definitely the main character, so the focus is still going to be on her continuing desperate quest for power. So I guess the final question will be whether she actually gets it.
Yeah, where will this lust for power end?
Yes.
I feel there's...
Are we about to both make the same reference to Macbeth?
Yes.
Just join us later for a different approach to the tragedy of the lust for power.
Next, this episode, we will be discussing the new film from Paul Thomas Anderson, Licorice Pizza. Set in the 1970s, this film follows the young romance of Elena Kane and Gary Valentine, an oddball couple of different ages who never seem to be both in love with each other at the same time. The film is set in the San Fernando Valley against the backdrop of the 70s oil crisis, the rise of the waterbed, and the legalization of pinball. We saw this in cinema recently. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I thought this was very charming in a slightly offbeat way, a very strong bit of character work and acting. It sort of held my attention throughout. I was very engaged with the characters. I very much wanted them both to succeed. It also had a few moments of enjoyable surrealism that stops it being some sort of hardcore piece of dramatic work. There's no mistaking that this is a very odd world they live in, to the extent that that's justified at all. Obviously, the Gary Valentine character is kind of Hollywood adjacent, so they can bring in utterly maladjusted Hollywood people who live entirely in the world of celebrity and have no sense of reality. It's very fun, it's very enjoyable to watch. It moves through quite a lot of time within the film. Like I think the action spans over about 3-4 years, we concluded, and I quite liked the way it felt like their lives moved through these distinct phases. The main two characters, Alana and Gary, have different jobs and different roles and different people around them at different times in their life. It felt very true to life in a weird way, and I found it quite easy to buy into the characters as a result of that. And yeah, it's very watchable. Alana Haim as the main character is great in this. Yeah, I think Alana's probably the main character. She's the one who gets to carry most of the actual emotion. And yeah, she's great in this, which is obviously impressive considering it's her first dramatic role, and it's fun to see, I think, basically the entire rest of her immediate family in various bit parts. And Cooper Hoffman's really good as Gary Valentine as well. So yeah, enjoyed this.
Yeah, it's a really funny, character-driven comedy, which these character-driven films is what Paul Thomas Anderson does so well. He's always got a real good eye for deep and complex characters. And it's kind of weird how it's told through this sort of series of vignettes that always seems to be summer, even though it's set over several years. And I guess because it's set in this kind of sunny part of California where there's film studios and things like that. I mean, the San Fernando Valley is a reoccurring setting for Paul Thomas Anderson films, such as Boogie Nights, a previous film of his, is also set in the San Fernando Valley. So it's a kind of, I think it's around where he grew up. So yeah, he kind of keeps coming back to it as a location. And I believe also it's where the Haim family are also from. So there's a connection there. Yeah, I just really like the kind of the characters and stuff and the strange get-rich-quick schemes they kind of get sucked up in, always trying to get involved in sort of things that are very of the time. It's quite a sort of lurid depiction of the 70s in that there's a lot of very 70s things thrown in. There's a person in a white suit. They try to make money through selling waterbeds, which seems just incredibly 70s.
Yeah, and there's lots of well-timed 70s music needle drops as well. All, I think, fairly well-known songs, like in that I am not a particularly big music head, and I recognised almost all of them. Nice bit of Bowie here and there.
Yeah, they had Bowie, they had Wings. There's a reference to, like, Todd Rundgren at one point. What I did also like, though, is that they're in the radio stations and stuff they're listening to as they drive around. There are a few, like, older songs, like Nina Simone's on the soundtrack at one point, and that I did like because obviously in the 70s, people did play music from, like, the 50s and 60s as well, just as today radio stations don't just play music from this decade or the last 10 years, and that kind of made it seem a bit more realistic. One of the things that period pieces get wrong is that, like, not everyone was up to date and not all music was contemporary in the past, so that kind of made it feel a bit more realistic.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fun sequences, I think, in the sort of latter half of the film when they get a bit more into the Hollywood stuff, where they encounter some A-list real-world actors playing some real gone-in-the-head Hollywood psychopaths. I think it's Sean Penn, Bradley Cooper, and Tom Waits are the main three who appear, playing complete weirdo lunatics who the main characters just sort of tiptoe around and side-eye at. I think Bradley Cooper especially has a lot of fun as this guy who just corners Gary Valentine and just delivers weird threats at him. Yeah, they're very strange moments in what's otherwise played as often quite a sort of grounded coming-of-age romance, but it's very funny, so fine.
Yeah, Bradley Cooper especially is just kind of scene stealing in everything he's in. You know, just so intense and sort of so over the top. Playing a character apparently that's inspired by John Peters, the producer of Superman.
He's playing this lunatic with massive dramatic inflections. This character who could easily be played by Matt Berry. It's very strange.
Yeah. It's just sort of, there's a bit when he threatens to set someone on fire with a petrol pump, which is it's just quite terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen any Paul Thomas Anderson films, I don't think, before, and I'm aware that his stuff is known for being a bit sort of occasionally surreal, and that's definitely where those sequences come in.
Yeah, absolutely. And similarly, as you mentioned with the scene involving Tom Waits and Sean Penn, especially like Tom Waits, again, a phenomenal cameo. Again, is he acting? Is he just being Tom Waits? He's playing this, playing this absolutely completely off the hinge drunken Hollywood types.
And yeah, and there's a sort of a rise and fall to it, and you have these sort of intense moments where the two characters are just around these crazy situations, and then you sort of have a soft moment afterwards where they have emotion about it, and that's sort of the thing that drives the film through a lot of it. It's in some ways quite a low impact film. It never, stirred me to tears or made me feel like I was experiencing some massive seismic feeling. But yeah, it's weird. For a film that's so silly, it's actually quite sort of a nice low-key character piece. It's quite well played.
Yeah, you don't feel this like huge dramatic stakes. I guess the kind of the core of it is the kind of the relationship, the will they, won't they, the fact that they're sort of in love with each other at different times. But it's all quite innocent and in some ways quite chaste, this film, I guess. I mean, the kind of the main theme of it is sort of young love and the sort of youthful energy. And in that sense, it's a very tame depiction of kind of young love. But this is quite sweet, but it's not emotionally wrought and things like that. And it mixed up with their get-rich-quick schemes and the sort of weird enthusiasm they throw themselves into anything. It's kind of this rich portrait of what it is to be sort of young, full of energy, have your life ahead of you.
Well, yeah, and I think the specific characters here are quite well written as well, like because it focuses on them so heavily and goes through so many phases of their lives, it's able to draw quite a clear picture of them. Like there's this sense of Gary Valentine as this sort of weirdly mature, or at least putting on a good face of maturity teenager, and then Alana as this woman who every time she encounters the adult world finds it somehow repellent or boring and wants to just run off and have fun with Gary. And there's a sort of middle point they meet in, and it does quite a good job of making that clear over the course of all these different situations.
Yeah, and I think like every shot of the film or every scene of the film has either one or the other of them in it. They are kind of the core of the film.
As I say, I think Alana possibly gets slightly more of the dramatic action, if such a thing exists here. But yeah, it is definitely, the relationship between the two of them is the main part. She's
certainly the breakout character. I mean, most of the reviews I've seen in media around it have focused on her character, and I've seen more interviews with Alana Haim than with Cooper Hoffman. Not that Cooper Hoffman isn't good in this film, and he is really talented. He does both funny and dramatic well. But yeah, it does seem to be that Alana, the sort of both on-screen and I guess off-screen version of her has sort of become the breakout from this film.
Well, which is strange in some ways, because Alana in this film isn't really the big showy character, in terms of being a breakout character. Gary Valentine is far more over the top than she is.
Yeah, which is I guess one of the reasons why they balance each other out in some ways, which is what makes them kind of a good kind of core for a film. I mean, maybe it's because like people relate more to the sort of slightly sardonic, world-weary person who delivers the put-downs to the Gary Valentine who's more youthful, energetic, full of like, we're going to do this. They're legalizing pinball. We're going to open a pinball arcade. I don't know if we're all just too cynical to relate to that too much.
Well, yeah, but it's always slightly undercut. Like, there's in a similar sequence to that, around that same time, she's giving Gary this speech about how she's in politics now and she's making the world a better place. And it's obviously very try-hard, I guess. It comes across as her trying to very much tell herself she really should be doing this sort of important work, as she's far too old to be messing around with these teenagers.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It's a sort of good character moment. Weaving in, again, some more 70s stuff in that she works for Joel Wax, who apparently was a real person. I discovered.
Oh, okay.
An actual councilman from the San Fernando Valley area in the 70s. So yeah, that's another way that kind of they're bringing in the sort of, the kind of connections to the 70s, such as, Sean Penn's character, which we mentioned, is based on William Holden, who was in The Towering Inferno and Network. And they also bring in these like kind of cultural things, like there's a plot line involving like a gay character, which is kind of showing how things were becoming maybe a bit more liberal in the 70s. The OPEC oil crisis is weaved in. There's a lot of references to Taxi Driver, including one bit on the sort of Joel Wax's campaign for mayor, where they pretty much recreate the scene from Taxi Driver when Travis is loitering outside a campaign office. So yeah, I did, especially as a big fan of Martin Scorsese, I appreciated that a lot. So yeah, and also there's like things about how like food is changing as the world becomes more global. There's a sort of several scenes take place in this new sushi restaurant. So yeah, I kind of like those sort of low-key nods to how the world changed in the 1970s.
And that sushi restaurant comes with some slightly baffling near-to-knuckle 70s comedy scenes about the owner and his string of Japanese wives.
Yeah, I mean, I assume it's a reflection on how people were very racist in the 70s. The white guy who owns the Japanese restaurant is pretty much very rude about his Japanese employees to their faces, and they just sort of accept it because they kind of have to do what he says because he has all the power in this situation. Which, although it's kind of played for laughs in the sense of, look at this guy, I can't believe he thinks this is an appropriate way to behave, but it's also kind of maybe undercutting the nostalgia a bit. It's basically saying that, like, the 70s wasn't all just kind of great records and white suits. There was like a real undercurrent of racism to all this.
Well, yeah, and all the sequences with the weird Hollywood people. I mean, it's very funny, but it's also slightly terrifying. Then again, who knows what's happening under the surface in Hollywood now?
Yeah, but I guess there was certainly at the time, maybe in the sort of age of pre-social media, pre-24-hour news coverage, when there was more license to behave like an absolute lunatic if you were rich and famous, because there were a lot less consequences and
a lot less smartphones, yeah,
and a lot less scrutiny and a lot more sort of authority invested in the rich and famous. Which again, this kind of, they're commenting on that. It's like, I think similar to what we said when we discussed Derry Girls, there's a lot of nostalgia in here for the 70s, from the clothes to the cars to the music, but there's always something like undercutting it. It's not a kind of, oh, look how great the past was, wasn't it lovely? There's always something undercut saying, like, it's pretty horrible as well at times.
Yeah, I mean, I think it focusing on the characters quite a lot to the extent that it never hugely becomes about the past, but yeah.
Yeah, once again, the sort of character-driven pieces, which Paul Thomas Anderson does very well. I think the last of his films I saw was Phantom Thread, which was set in Britain and it was also set in the past, but very much a character-led film.
Yeah, I don't know. I know I did my bit earlier about how our Oscar predictions in the past have been a smidge unreliable, but this does feel like the sort of well-made, Hollywood-focused character drama that they will surely at least chuck an actor nomination to or something.
Yeah, I can imagine this getting quite a few nominations. I think it strikes me as a sort of slightly, I hate this phrase, but quirky indie film that will get nominations, but maybe is a bit too oddball to win when placed up against some more straightforward, serious Hollywood dramas.
Yeah, and perhaps it doesn't have enough sort of towering, memorable moments to stick in the mind. I don't know. Which is a shame, because it's a nice film, and I would have no problem with it doing well. But on this occasion, even if it doesn't win loads of Oscars, give it a go.
Finally, this episode, we will be discussing The Tragedy of Macbeth, a new film from Joel Cohen, now directing solo without his brother Ethan, based on the play by Shakespeare and starring Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand. I assume people don't need an intro for the plot of Macbeth, but I guess if you do, here's a brief summary. After putting down a rebellion for King Duncan, Macbeth, the Thane of Cawdor, receives a prophecy from 3 witches that he will be king. But his ambition soon turns to violence as he and his wife conspire against his king and brothers-in-arms in the pursuit of power. We saw this film recently on Apple TV+. Nick, what did you make of it?
Kind of in two minds about this. The aesthetic is very eye-catching. They've shot it in this sort of ghostly black and white and grey filmed in purgatory vibe, which is very eye-catching and interesting, and it's a lot of the sort of outdoor set scenes where the supernatural shit happens, which are actually quite impressive and exciting and inspiring. But yeah, on the other hand, a lot of the actual adaptation of the textual parts are quite straight and stagey, and it's just people delivering lines indoors and mostly delivering them very well. Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand are as good as you'd imagine them to be, and everyone else is supporting them strongly. Yeah, I don't know. I was maybe expecting this to be a bit more additive and have a bit more of a take on Macbeth, but apart from the black and white vibe, it's quite a straight shooting of it. That is my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, they've done a sort of quite trad Macbeth. There's no shortage of Shakespeare if you want to go see it in London, and if you want to see kind of Shakespeare in the closest way to how it's was performed in Shakespeare's time, you can go to the Globe Theatre. And this, could, on some levels, be a Globe Theatre production of the play. The only, I guess, slightly unusual thing is that they've got an older couple doing Macbeth when he's usually portrayed as a sort of young upstart who wants to climb the ranks. Whereas I guess now they've got, with Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand, it's a sort of an older couple. But yeah, it is a quite trad theatre-y version. And then there's the Coen visual eye to it, the minimalistic, quite abstract, sort of high contrast black and white world it takes place in. The Coen brothers film it kind of most reminds me of is The Man Who Wasn't There, which is sort of set in the 1950s America, and it has this very strong high contrast black and white aesthetic. You know, as someone who's really interested in the kind of art, and especially sort of minimalist art and sort of abstract art, I really kind of just dug the vibe of this. And the sort of, black and white is very much my colour scheme.
Yeah, it does look cool, and I think the weird ghostly world they've shot it in is very visually interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if some English teachers did seize on this as a new definitive adaptation to put their students through. It's got some famous people in it, it's pleasantly watchable, it hacks the whole thing down to less than 2 hours, I think, just over 100 minutes.
This is a sort of an abridged version of the play. It's one of Shakespeare's shortest plays, but they've still abridged it heavily to fit it into 2 hours. But I think what they've done as well is, rather than dropping... There's a few scenes I think they've dropped, but what they've kind of done is just sort of shortened scenes and shortened some of the long monologues and stuff, which does mean it does have a cinematic pace to it, I suppose it's different to the theatre. It kind of, a lot of short, sharp scenes, goes from place to place quickly, builds tension that way, which means you get the kind of whole play in there, but in a quite short version of it.
Yeah, and I've got most of this play rattling around. That's probably a lie, but I've got a lot of highlight lines of this play rattling around in my head from studying it, as I say, at GCSE English. And yeah, I think I got all the lines I expected to hear. They definitely, I guess, knew what the memorable bits were and made sure to get them in.
Yeah, everything like something wicked this way comes, double bubbled, toil and trouble. Is this a dagger I see before me? All of the good ones. all the bangers.
all the hits, yeah. All the best of it. Yeah, it's definitely a strong, competent version of what it is. I find some of the more orgasmic reviews a bit strange, but I can't deny it's well made, and the visual is very strong and consistent.
Yeah, I did maybe expect to be blown away a bit more by it.
Well, yeah.
I love the Coen brothers. I think they do great films, and I really love how there's a real aesthetic running through their films, and they have a real attention to detail, everything from similar to Paul Thomas Anderson, down to the way characters speak, the little things that give them personality, the kind of aspects of kind of setting and set design, and all the sort of attention to detail that really brings it to life. And that's all there here. And again, the kind of artiness, the kind of influences of German expressionism in the set design, the high contrast black and white, influences on classic films such as The Passion of Joan of Arc from 1928 was apparently a big reference point for this film, and other kind of very sort of starkly black and white. There's lots of stuff I really liked about this, but I suppose watching it wasn't quite electric. The films that really kind of stand out for each year. I mean, it's my favourite film I've seen so far this year, but I don't think will it stay on the top by the end of the year? Who knows?
Yeah, I'll be surprised if this is in the old end of year top 5. If this is in the end of year top 5 by the time we finish this year off for me, then it's been a rough year. Because I thought this was interesting, but didn't quite, as you say, it didn't quite electrify me. I imagine, this is what I imagine will almost definitely do well at the Oscars in the acting categories, if it does well anywhere. I don't know why Oscar wins off by heart, but I'm pretty certain Frances McDormand has at least one Oscar, and I wouldn't be surprised if Denzel Washington also does.
Yeah, I believe Denzel, he won for Training Day, which is a great film. I think he might have more than one. Frances McDormand, I believe, has 3 Best Actress Oscars, including one she won last year for Nomadland.
Okay, maybe they'll feel weird about giving her another one, I don't know.
I think she holds the record.
Or maybe she'd be Best Supporting Actress in this, I don't know.
Oh, that's a good point, actually, yeah. Where this is likely to do well is in the acting categories. Denzel Washington was great. Commanding on the screen, always holding your attention, delivering sort of the Shakespeare with gusto. When he's angry, you can really believe this is the murderous rage of a man who's killed, a lot of people.
Yeah, it's true. The Denzel soliloquies were good. And also the witches as well. The way they played the 3 witches, which I guess is the obvious part for the director to have a bit of fun when making Macbeth. And he did take the opportunity here to go to town with it in this sort of weird, contorted bird-like thing he did. That was fun.
Yeah, it was quite creepy. They really did nail how creepy the witches are. And there's a few bits even with sudden rushes of crows or ravens taking off that kind of did actually make me jump.
Yeah, I don't know. I always feel bad about being possibly slightly down on it because, yeah, it's visually at least, it's very nicely done. He's definitely committed to this aesthetic and carried it through pretty seamlessly. As you say, there's the sort of vaguely abstract minimalism of it, which is quite appealing. And this sort of, I think I described it as a filmed in purgatory vibe at the beginning, and that's definitely kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a weirdly sort of empty world. This sort of thing, this whole thing takes place in, even though there's like kings and battles and stuff. It's very empty and sort of devoid of life.
Yeah, it's both an interesting bit of world building, but also kind of contributes to the way the whole thing feels kind of stagey, because it does also obviously catch the vibe of the theatre, where you're sort of encouraged to think of the wider world outside, even though you can't see it.
It was the classic sort of slightly abstract world that works on film and theatre, but like if you dug into it any more, it would quickly stop making sense. Like, where does all their food come from? Because there's nothing living in this world apart from these people and a few birds. So,
well, yeah, perhaps world building was the wrong word there.
Yeah, no, I know. No, I know what you mean. Though what you're getting at is it feels like a kind of a consistent world because of this kind of the aesthetic that's brought through everything.
Yeah, and I can't deny that is played well, and the acting is very good. So yeah, there's a lot of strength here. It's a decent adaptation of Macbeth. I was just, again, I don't know, maybe based just on all the very good reviews I've seen, I was expecting it to, I don't know, take some chances or be surreal or have a dramatic take on the material.
Yeah, not so much. It'd be interesting to see how this does. I think similar to Licorice Pizza, this will pick up nominations, but might not be sort of the ones that picks up big wins. I noticed yesterday that the Producers Guild of America nominated their 10 best films of the year, which is usually a pretty strong indication of what the Oscar nominations for best film of the year will be. And Licorice Pizza was on their list of 10. Tragedy of Macbeth was not. But I saw a lot of people speculating on Twitter that it's usually about 8 or 9 of the PGA films get onto the Oscar list. So if there's the kind of 1 or 2 that's not, well, probably Tragedy of Macbeth might be the one that's likely to get there. That's not on the PGA list. But yeah, the runners and riders are kind of emerging from the pack at this point.
Okay, well, yeah, I must admit, if I had to pick one of these 2 films to go all the way, it would probably be Licorice Pizza at this stage. But we'll see where we are in however many months it is. Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much for listening. If you want still more from the MFV stable, you can go to moderatefantasyviolence.com and find our old episodes, essays, including our recent end-of-year stuff from 2021, and all manner of other delights. And if you enjoy these delights, then why not go to your podcast app of choice and leave us a nice 5-star review. Thank you.
If you want even more from us, then you can follow us on Twitter, where we're at MFV Podcast, or you can find us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can also find me on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, or find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com.
And you can find me at nickmb on Twitter or nickbryan.com on the wider internet, where I am really meant to be starting to spin up to another comic release soon, so hopefully there will be more tweets in the near future. And in the even nearer future, probably, you can listen to the next episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, where we'll be covering the Book of Boba Fett, the latest Disney Star Wars concoction, and also the movie Don't Look Up in our continued quest to catch all those Oscar hopefuls. So, see you in 2 weeks for that. Bye-bye.
Bye.